Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the City of Courtenay Regular Council meeting for September 13th. I want to welcome everybody. I want to just start by respectfully acknowledging that the land on which we gather on is the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land, and we appreciate them accepting us here. I want to comment that we do have Councillor Jolicoeur who is attending via Zoom, and mainly for you, Councillor Jolicoeur, if I'm not paying attention to you, just let me know and I'll do my best to engage you in the conversation. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So I'd just like to announce that September 17th to September 23rd, the Courtenay Legion will be hosting numerous public events in honor of the first official National Legion Week. This week-long event is designed to educate communities on the work that the local branch does and reinforce the role that the Legion plays in supporting veterans in our community.
Excellent. Thanks for that, and appreciate that, Councillor Cole Hamilton, and the significance that it has for you and your family. So thank you very much. Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to announce that United Way BC Day is on September 26th, celebrating the community work, initiatives, and programs focused on child and youth mental health, the Better at Home program to support independence for seniors, and various schools out programs in the city of Courtenay.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Councillor McCollum. And I am not aware of any late items, so we'll move into the adoption of minutes. Excellent. Were there any error or omissions? Seeing none, I'll take the minutes as adopted unanimously, and we'll move right into our delegations. So to start with, we have the Welcoming Communities Coalition. If you would like to come up, Julie, and once you're at the podium, you can just press the little microphone button and I'll turn on your microphone. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bob. Thank you, everybody, for having us here tonight. The delegation that's coming up after mine is our new executive director and our regional settlement manager for the Immigrant Welcome Center. Some of you know a little bit about the Welcoming Communities Coalition, but what we are is a local immigration partnership, or a LIP, and we're hosted and coordinated through the Immigrant Welcome Center. We're on the first slide still, sorry. Local immigration partnerships are planning bodies through which Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada supports the development of community-based partnerships to address needs of newcomers. LIPs vary in size and organization. Some are housed within municipalities, while others are in community-based organizations like ours is with the Immigrant Welcome Center. The main objective of a LIP is to strive to engage a wide variety of stakeholders in a focused strategic planning process to strengthen welcoming communities for newcomers, which promotes their success in Canada. While the newcomer serving sector is the key collaborator, other partners include employers, school boards, libraries, health agencies, boards of trade, various government representation, professional associations, and faith-based organizations. Next slide, please. So what is a welcoming community? These two definitions here helped us to, for something to strive to. A welcoming community is a collective effort to design and sustain a place where immigrants feel they belong and that supports immigrants' economic, socio-cultural, and civic political integration. A welcoming community has structures, processes, and practices in place that meet the needs and promote the inclusion of immigrants in all aspects of life, and actively works to ensure that these are effective. Next slide. The Welcoming Communities Coalition was launched in June 2016, and we are the LIP for Comox Valley, Campbell River, Port Hardy, Port McNeill. There's 19 LIPs across the province of BC and 85 now across Canada. And they're all supported by Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. So we're community-based partnerships that provide collaborative framework to support things like community level research, identifying basic barriers facing newcomers, raise awareness around newcomer needs, and improve accessibility. Next slide. So anybody can be a coalition member. Members can be anyone who with a commitment to growing diversity and equal opportunities in the Comox Valley. Individuals and organizations can join, and all members have to do is sign a letter that they believe in the importance of community building, diversity, and inclusion. We are here today from the Welcoming Communities Coalition to ask that the City of Courtenay does become an official member of the coalition. And in your package, you were given the letter, the membership letter, and also the terms of reference to have a look at. Next slide. This shows you some of the members that we currently have. We do have 36 members in the Comox Valley, 30 members in Campbell River, and we're just in the process this year of gathering our signatures in Port Hardy and Port McNeill. And as I said before, anybody can become a member, and Councillor Will Cole Hamilton is one individual who has signed a letter to become a member personally. So you can see from the list there that most of them are people who are interested in newcomers and their well-being or their service providers in that area. So our next slide. So the vision and the mission and the purpose of the Welcoming Community Coalition, you'll see the vision, a North Island region, Comox Valley to Port Hardy, that embraces diversity and inclusivity while actively engaging with the vibrant cultures in the region and where newcomers feel welcome, safe, and respected. This vision for the Welcoming Communities Coalition is exactly the same vision for the Immigrant Welcome Center. And then from there, our steering committees prepared the strategic plan and the purpose based on a table discussion. Our main points of engagement are through our annual collaboratory, which is in February 29th, coming up next year. We have steering committees in Comox Valley, Campbell River, and in the Mount Waddington region. We also have an immigrant advisory table, and that table is a selected group of local immigrant residents who provide valuable feedback and play a formative role in our strategic planning. And then next slide. So we went out last year and asked newcomers how people in the community could do some ways of welcoming that are very, very simple for people to do. So these are just some of the ways that we can help make newcomers welcome in their new home. And then the last slide is just myself and our admin assistant, our contact information if anybody has any questions. And you can see a full listing of our steering committee members on the website. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Julie, for the presentation. And so you talked about you have that, so your main meeting in February and then the steering committees. What kind of commitment would you expect if this is something that the city signs on to, that we might expect that staff would have to commit to in terms of meetings? And then obviously there might be some prep for those meetings.
Right. So Currently, probably off the side of your desks, some of you are already attending some of our meetings. So we have 2 membership meetings a year. No prep work for you. You show up, we have some questions pre-designed, and we walk through what's going on in our community. So there's 2 of those a year. And then we do collaboratory once a year, which we invite. That's one event for the whole island, North Island. So we would hope some representatives would come to that.
Okay. And from a representative standpoint, are you looking for members of council or staff or a mixture?
A mixture, whoever feels it's important to attend and can contribute and represent the city. And
Excellent. Are there any other questions or comments from council at all? I mean, we normally don't make recommendations to staff right when we get a delegation, but this will come back to us and we'll be able to have a more fulsome conversation and chat with staff about what the options and implications are. And yeah, with that, thanks very much for your presentation. All right, and next up we have the Immigrant Welcome Center. And Shams, I know we were emailing back and forth, so at some point we'll get some time to chat. Yeah, if you just press the button there, and all right.
Thank you. So it's a real pleasure. I'm a newcomer to this community. I've moved here from the mainland, but I'm someone who is an immigrant that came here originally from East Africa 50 years ago. And I had the pleasure of working with some of the communities in this organization. I was the ED for the BC Council for International Cooperation. And I didn't know along that journey that I would actually have the pleasure to come and live here. So I'm very happy to have taken on this role and to be a part of the Immigrant Welcome Center now, and to have the pleasure to meet all of you. So I have my colleague Thuy Sin, who has been with the organization for almost 20 years and a member of this community as well. And we'd like to engage with you on the kind of work that we do. So the Multicultural and Immigration Services Association of North Vancouver Island has been a member in this community for over 30 years. And if we move to the next slide, you can see that we assist local communities in attracting and retaining newcomers by providing education and professional services to members of those communities, while offering advocacy for vulnerable populations and settlement services, thereby fostering welcoming and inclusive communities. Our mission statement, as Julie had mentioned earlier, is that this is a region that embraces diversity and inclusivity while actively engaging with vibrant cultures in the region, and where newcomers feel welcome, safe, and respected. The kinds of services that we have, and we have a staff of close to 30 people. We have 3 different offices in Courtenay, in Campbell River, and on the North Island. And we help when newcomers come with digital literacy, employment support, language classes for new people, interpretation, housing information, childcare. And one of the services that we have launched quite recently is language instruction and settlement workers in schools. And as you can imagine, for new families that come here, it's really quite a challenge in terms of navigating the school system and the curriculum and all of the issues of resettling families. So currently, our work in schools is something that's really important for us. The kinds of services that we provide are, as I mentioned earlier, and we have clients that come from many different communities. In this context, we have large representation of people from the Philippines, Ukraine, as you know, Vietnam, China, India, and so on. And we have more than 1,000 clients on an annual basis that we actually see. We also have some community-focused programming that you do, which includes book clubs, youth integration programming, family recreation in the local recreation center. We also have volunteers, if we move forward on the slides. We also have volunteers, I think we're at the next slide now, that work with us on a variety of these kinds of services. And the language instruction, if we go to the next slide, is something that we've had a very large demand for, and we currently actually have a waiting list for people that would like to enroll in the language instruction. And we've been fortunate that we offer language instruction as guided by one of our donors, which is IRCC. But we've also managed to have some language instruction where we look at the context in workplaces and what it's like for newcomers to be in new workplaces. And in that context, we've been fortunate to have a private donor, which is actually the Royal Bank, that supports us. So we would like to increase these kinds of services, which enable us to engage with employers and the corporate sector as well. The Welcoming Communities Coalition is the next slide, and Julie spoke to that. And so really, you know, we provide immediate services for new immigrants as they come into our communities in terms of the settlement work, but it's also for the long term about how to make the communities that our clients live in safe and welcoming places as they raise their families and actually live in these communities. And I think increasingly there is research that says for newcomers coming into smaller rural communities, it's a much more welcoming and easier place for people to actually settle into than into the larger cities of Toronto, Vancouver, and so on. If we go to our community partners, you know, we've been very fortunate, I think, in the time that we've been here to have built partnerships and a relationship with many different community organizations across different sectors that support our work. And this is something that we would like to carry on paying closer attention to. If we go to the final slide, our primary donors that enable us to do this work are Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. The province of BC is also supporting our work when it comes to temporary foreign workers, international students, and some of the very specific needs of these communities. And then finally, just to thank you and see how you could, as individuals or as members of the broader community, actually support our work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Shams, for the presentation and for all the work you've been doing in the community for decades. Maybe not you personally, but obviously the organization has been quite amazing. And over the past couple of years, I've been somewhat involved, especially with Ukrainian refugees, and Tweed's been amazing, and all the staff, Julie, et cetera. It's been an absolute pleasure working with different folks on a variety of different causes. So, and just looking at the partners that you have, obviously goes to show that there's no ask that you have. So. So I was just going to comment that, you know, when you talk about the language skills, that seems to be one of the things where the rubber hits the road. Housing obviously is a big challenge as well, but those language barriers and the fact that you're providing those courses, and it's great to hear that you're getting some funding from the IRCC and you're getting RBC as a private donor in that. But do you see, because that's probably the number one thing that I hear about is just the wait lists, and there's lots of people that really want to get into those. How do you see dealing with that? Is it purely a funding issue, or is there a capacity around instructors?
So thank you for asking that. We are currently in our office building here in Courtenay, expanding the offices so that we can actually have more classes offered on site where we're actually based. So I think, you know, the wait list is a short-term issue, and within the next few months, that would be resolved.
Well, that's great to hear. Really good to hear. Thanks for that. And we have some questions. I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks very much for coming and welcome to the community. I'm an immigrant myself, although you have to go back over 60 years to when my family arrived in Canada. And we didn't have organizations like yours to welcome us. So I really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues are doing. I'm wondering if you have any engagement with the international students who come here, either to the school district or the college. There's quite a significant number, and I'm sure there's lots of common ground with the issues that they face, housing being one of the predominant ones.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have quite a number of the international students. We have been help them connected to the housing income tax return, or community connection with other agency that with any other need that they might come up with.
And I think also now that some of them are able to actually work as, a significant number of hours to try and support them in finding appropriate employment. Because I think many of, especially the international students, are quite well qualified and have a lot of experience. And I think one of the biggest challenges in this sector is matching the experience and the education that many new immigrants come with appropriate jobs. And that's a major issue in the sector. And, I think there have been studies done that show that the majority of new immigrants that come to Canada are actually highly qualified. And unfortunately, they spend many years in jobs and sectors that they are way more qualified for. But I think that's slowly changing in terms of the health sector, with new roles for associate doctors and different ways, even for nurses to be able to enter the sector. So I think it's moving forward, but definitely those kinds of things are issues and challenging.
Yeah, that's great to hear. If we go back far enough, we're all immigrants, and I think our community is much richer for people who come and build their lives here. And I hope that if you feel there's anything specific that we can do as a city to help people feel more welcome, that you will let us know. And I think you'll find us happy to listen and do what we can. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to just repeat that really happy that you came to present, and really thankful for all the work that you do. About 30 years ago, I worked at Comox Valley Family Services, where the immigrant settlement program was back at that time. It's been really wonderful to see how the community has become more diverse over the years. I wanted to just bring attention to some of the initiatives that we've been trying to do at the city to support welcoming folks to the community. So part of our strategic priorities are a city for everyone. We have our arts and culture folks coming up later. That came up a lot in the cultural plan to try to make our community more reflective of the folks who are living here. So I'm really hopeful that as we progress with these initiatives, that we can further support the work that you're doing and celebrate the skill sets that people are bringing in. And I really appreciate there's been a lot of employment gaps in the community, and many newcomers are filling those gaps and contributing in huge ways. So I just thank you for your work, and I hope that we can continue to work together to create a vibrant, diverse community. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Morin. So with that, you had no requests, and so we're just going to let you go on your way. And again, thank you very much for your presentation tonight and for all the work you do in our community.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All right, moving on to staff reports. We have development services for the non-farm use in the agricultural land reserve. And I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, through the mayor. I think Ms. Goddard is going to do a short introduction and CVRD staff are here to speak to their application.
That's right. Good evening. So the purpose of the report before you is to provide a referral resolution to the Agricultural Land Commission for an application for non-farm uses and the placement of fill on Comox Valley Exhibition Ground lands, which are in the Agricultural Land Reserve. The exhibition grounds is comprised of 5 properties along Headquarters Road, and indeed CVRD staff will be providing some visuals in their presentation shortly. The CVRD has submitted a high-level concept site plan and implementation strategy to describe the proposed uses to be phased over the next 10-year timeframe. The plan is indeed conceptual, and details could change as individual phases are proposed with the budgeting and implementation stages down the road. This plan builds on the 2017 Exhibition Grounds Master Plan to provide more technical refinements. This concept plan was created in 2021, and since that time, the city has updated a number of master plans, such as the Cycling Network Plan, Master Servicing Plans, and the OCP. Therefore, staff recognize that updated technical information is required as part of the ALC non-farm use application referral in order to ensure alignment and servicing feasibility between the exhibition ground proposals and city plans. The city's role in considering non-farm use applications, including the placement of fill on lands in the ALR, is to decide on whether to authorize the application to proceed to the ALC for ALC decision-making or not, and to do so by resolution of council. The site is multifunctional and currently includes facilities for equestrian events, festivals, trails, curling rink, along with the regular hosting of the farmers market. Many of the existing exhibition ground uses are permitted as farm uses or permitted non-farm uses, and some other non-farm uses are permitted by previous ALC approvals. CVRD staff will shortly provide that presentation on the concept, so I won't discuss the details here, but in general terms, staff can confirm that the request for the expanded non-farm uses is supportable in principle according to the OCP policy. There are some nuances in this, in that some of the agricultural zoning, the agricultural 1 zone in the former Stonehenge Farms property, for instance, does not align with the permitted ALC uses, and therefore rezoning and actually an OCP land use designation change will be required to formalize some of those proposed uses in the concept plan. You'll see that the recommended resolution is that council support the application with some conditions for the ALC to consider, such as the traffic impact assessment, a capacity modeling for infrastructure, coordination of parks plans, cycling network plan, infrastructure plans into the proposed exhibition ground concept plan, and that the city land use and zoning items be addressed for the 4875 Headquarters Road Stonehenge property, and consolidation of the parcels into one property to address the impacts of multiple property lines, which can complicate the siting of structures and pose other possible requirements along property lines, such as landscaping. The CVRD has requested that the conditions for infrastructure related studies not be required as part of the resolution, and that infrastructure studies be addressed closer to the time of proposal implementation, such as by phase. However, staff do recommend the studies be included as part of the ALC resolution consideration to ensure that traffic can be adequately and comprehensively managed with future uses, and in particular sewer and water capacity be known for any possible future connections. Staff feel more comprehensive information in these areas is needed to evaluate the impact of expanding the non-farm uses on the property to avoid incremental assessments that can result in conflicts when viewed more piecemeal, and to better understand how the uses will integrate with the city's more recent master plans since 2021. I'll also note that implementation of proposals will require city permitting requirements depending on the nature and phase of the proposal, and could include driveway, soil, sign, building, tree cutting, and environmental development permits, all depending on the specific uses proposed. These will be evaluated individually at the time of implementation proposal. And as mentioned, the Stonehenge Farm former property full proposed uses will require rezoning and OCP land use amendment, which would become before council at a future date. Now, before I introduce the CVRD speakers, I'd like to acknowledge a couple of typos in the report. So any reference to Vanier Creek should actually be made to Towhee Creek. So apologies for confusion there. There is a reference to an internal storage facility that would in the future accommodate an events facility, although that should be qualified to read that there is the potential for an events facility, not an outright proposal. And the washroom proposal is not just for changes to existing washrooms, but actually a proposal for new washrooms. So now I'll introduce the CVRD staff applicants who will be providing a presentation with more proposal details. And then staff from both our organizations are available for questions after. So we have with us Trish Morgan, Assistant Senior Manager of Recreation Services. She's just walking there. Mike Morrissey, he's second in line there, Manager of Aquatic Center and Exhibition Grounds Operations. Doug DeMarzo, the third one, General Manager of Community Services. And on the Zoom, we also have Jennifer Zabinden, apologies if I didn't ask how to pronounce that, Senior Manager of Recreational Services. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I think you got most of those names pretty close. So that was great. If you press your microphone, then I'll turn that one on for you. Welcome to the CVRD meeting room, and I appreciate them letting us use this space. But with that, I'm not sure, did you have some comments you wanted to make before we go to questions?
Well, we do have.
Okay, you got a whole presentation.
Yeah,
Never mind.
so we can.
I'm catching up.
So we can go through the presentation. So thank you to Nancy for the introduction. And because I can't see that far, I'm gonna have to put on my reading glasses. So for background for council, the plan was developed in 2020 and 2021, and the conceptual site plan and implementation strategy is considered a living document, and it provides a roadmap for capital improvements. Although the plan is staged over 10 years, in reality, some of the work may take longer to complete, depending on funding and resources. And because it's a living document, some items may shift or change over time to meet community and user needs. As with all projects in local government, projects are subject to funding and resources, and it needs to be balanced with other CVRD priorities. So the 2021 plan builds on previous work undertaken by the CVRD. There was a master plan done in 2002, then a revitalization strategy in 2008, and another master plan in 2017. The plan, again, as Nancy mentioned, is before council because the CVRD has applied for a non-farm use permit from the ALC, and we're applying for the whole concept plan. And this is what we have done in the past, and the ALC recommended doing that rather than doing it piecemeal and project by project. Next slide, please. So as part of the process for the conceptual site plan, there were a number of goals and objectives that were established in 2017, and they were reviewed and reconfirmed that they were still relevant. So some of those as highlights were to provide a pastoral location for the leisure and enjoyment of the region's population, to serve as an event center for a wide range of community organizations, primarily those with the agricultural and equestrian roots, to provide a venue for the farmers market, to allow for the smooth passage of parking and vehicles, and to meet high environmental standards in all aspects of the site development. Next slide. Thank you. So some plan highlights. As you saw in the attachments, the plan is very large, but these are some of the highlights. So the first one is the revitalization of Market Field. And probably most of us have gone to the farmers market on a Saturday, and it has been well used and loved over the years, but the field is becoming uneven after all those years of great use. So we want to make it more accessible for those folks with mobility challenges. So we'd like to regrade the land and add drainage just to increase the accessibility for patrons. We'd also like to examine whether or not the educational plot next to Market Field could or should be relocated to the Stonehenge site. So right now we are doing soil assessments to examine some options there. We're also looking at the replacement of storage facilities. So in the picture there, you can see there's 3 old sheds that could be replaced with one. The user groups that use those sheds, they work really well together. And because of the age of those facilities, we're looking at just doing one, and then they can share them all together. So this building would not be a public building, but in that vicinity, there is some space that's earmarked should a bigger, larger public facility be envisioned later on down the road, but it's not part of the plan at this time. Trailhead improvements, so looking at bike racks, a covered shelter and a toilet, And then looking at new signage and wayfinding in and around the facility, just so people have an idea of where they're going and how they get to the different buildings and the different areas. We're also looking at the possibility of realignment of driveways or changes to internal road networks. And again, we just want to make sure the movement of people, vehicles, and animals are safe, and that we can have the most efficient use of our space. And then finally, way on down the road, there is the possibility of a new amphitheater for events. And those are some of the plan highlights. This little diagram here just shows how the idea is of the plan being phased over the short term, 1 to 2 years. We're already a few years into that short term, which is stretching out already. Medium term is in the yellow there, and long term is in purple. Next slide. So where are we now? So again, as I mentioned, historically, the CVRD has received ALC approval for the whole site with a comprehensive plan. And the ALC again recommended to the CVRD that we apply to do so instead of on a project by project basis. So application was submitted for non-farm use back in February. And in discussion with the ALC, it's likely that if council is to approve our application, that the ALC would probably be looking at it sometime in 2024. So we're still a little ways away. The things we are doing right now are trying to get some of our projects ready to go in anticipation of hopefully getting that approval. So we're working on the engineer design plan for Market Field. As Nancy mentioned, there's the possibility that Phil may have to be brought in, and it may have to be brought in for that project. And so an engineer is trying to help us determine what that might look like. And we are looking for a Class C cost estimate that we can apply to our budget next year. We're also working with a consultant to complete the necessary environmental impact assessments to ensure that the work we do doesn't have any negative impacts on environmentally sensitive areas. And again, we are doing some soil assessments that'll help us determine whether or not those demonstration plots can be moved. Next slide. So working together. So the city and the CVRD have always worked together, and we're looking forward to working together more. So with respect to trails, the CVRD is open to collaborating with the city on trail projects, especially those that cross jurisdictional boundaries. I was speaking to Mark Harrison the other day, our parks manager, and he said that this will be touched upon through the Regional Parks and Trails strategic planning process. And he would encourage the city to bring forward projects and ideas that would meet the intent of the regional trails that connect our core communities. We would like to also have some more dialogue with the city on the expectations for the traffic impact assessment, and we want to make sure that it meets the city's needs and aligns with the city's transportation plan. Similarly, we'd like to have further discussion about the timing of the bike lanes being planned, because as everyone knows, there's a lot of on-street parking there. And so we just want to understand what that's going to look like and how that may impact large events and things like the farmers market as well. The plan also, our plan also suggests building some off-street parking on Dove Creek Field. However, we'd like to talk to the city about whether or not there is an opportunity for some street parking at the end of Dove Creek Road, which is now a dead-end road. Next slide. So CVRD staff would like to respectively request the council consider an alternate recommendation, or rather an addition to the recommendation. The recommendation put forward by city staff recommends that a traffic impact assessment and capacity modeling for infrastructure be done. And we were fully open to coordinating plans with the city as well with respect to the grounds. But we would like to see, or we'd like to request if the traffic impact assessment and the capacity modeling could be done when there's a significant increase in usage or when we anticipate that. At this time, a lot of the projects we're doing are just really maintaining status quo, making some minor improvements, and we don't see major usage increasing. And again, we're not opposed to these recommendations. We're just concerned that given how long the plan may take to implement, that we are concerned that they may be stale or outdated, and then we may have to refresh those, which could cost extra funds. And again, the property's development is going to have to be balanced with other CVRD priorities, and it could extend past that 10-year time period and could change direction or development. It's also going to have to be balanced, as many of the councillors know who are on the Recreation Commission, with the needs that are identified in the strategic plan for recreation. And so that plan includes the development of a new artificial turf field at Vanier, as well as examining a third ice arena, which could be situated at Vanier. And our request is that perhaps it may make more sense for the city to examine traffic impacts for the larger area and not just the exhibition grounds. And we could do that working in partnership with the city. We also feel that maybe the bike lanes that are being proposed for 2024, we could have more talk about that just because of the street parking that's currently used and the congestion that's there. But we're also happy to continue to dialogue with the city on integrating plans, and we're not opposed to meeting any of the city requirements. We just want to make sure that when we do so, that it's with the foresight in mind of what is actually coming, and not in 10 years, but maybe in the shorter term in 3, 4, or 5 years. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. That may have generated a couple of questions. I'll maybe just take an opportunity to just see how the exhibition grounds have developed over the last 20 years that I've been involved, generally around larger events like Music Fest. Kudos to Mike and the crew for getting those Wi-Fi access points up just in time this year in conjunction with Shaw. That allowed Councillor Morin to go as acting mayor and not get any grief, so that was great. And the electrical upgrades and all those types of things that have happened to really make this I mean, for Vancouver Island, like a world-class site. And so seeing that there's this vision to continue on, I do appreciate that. With that, we do have a question from or comment from Councillor Hillian.
Thanks very much, Mayor, and thanks, Trish, for the presentation. Good to see you and your colleagues here today. And look forward to the ongoing development of these grounds to serve our community. One question for you and then one for our staff. The Recreation Commission strategic planning and the improvements and new development that you mentioned does increase the expected need for parking in the future. And I'm just wondering if there are other alternatives that have been looked at other than putting parking on the agricultural land off Duck Creek Road, if there's any other options that have been considered.
Thanks to the Mayor, to Director Hillian, Councillor Hillian. I feel that, as we move forth, that Dove Creek parking isn't necessarily was envisioned to support the rec facilities or even X grounds that much. It was largely envisioned to support the recreational use around the Solom River and the pathways and trails down there. So as we move forward with the arena and potential artificial turf fields, parking capacities will be looked at through those projects. And then the additional layer potentially down the road of the X grounds could layer onto that if we see any large volume increases. We already know that it's already a fairly highly used site and the capacity is already there. And none of the short-term plans really see any of those capacities changing in any way. But maybe in 5 or 6 years with some of the other developments, it becomes more of an attraction. But there's 2 other major projects in that area that could increase traffic flow. So we'd be predetermining that traffic study without knowing the results of those other 2 projects.
Okay, thanks very much for that. My other question for our planning staff is what's our position on the requested amended language that was mentioned by the presenters?
Councillor Hillian, yes, staff's position is as stated in the report that we feel there's benefits to having this information up front. The water and sewer capacity modeling, those would be a routine part of supporting land use decisions in other types of contexts, just to make sure they are feasible. No surprises down the road on that respect. The transportation one is as I think we can all recognize, a little more complex there. We know there's the new use, the existing uses and the new uses generate, well, the existing uses generate quite a bit of parking demand that spills over the site. And then there's some expanded uses there that I guess is not clear just how much more parking could be generated. Then there's the changes in the access and the egress implications. All then those, like they said, there's a cycling infrastructure that's coming in down the road, shoulder lanes, just for people's clarity. And then there's those other intersection improvements, but really about the land use itself is just making sure that there's a strategy to coordinate those changes, as well as to address the existing challenges that are on the site, because it's both existing and potential.
Okay, so the position is that all of the elements, A, B, C, and D are required now, including the traffic assessment.
And
See?
I got there.
Yeah, that's correct. That is the recommendation of staff in the resolution.
So the argument that a wider reaching traffic assessment might be required later, and we'd potentially be doing the same work twice, that doesn't wash from our perspective.
Hang on one second.
Through Councillor or Mayor Wells to Councillor Hillian. The idea of doing the traffic impact assessment now is to understand the impacts of the non-farm use and the existing, so that we understand the implications for the long use planning as we go through the process. And you would be doing, say, the first phase, you would look at it then, and that traffic impact assessment would inform that. So that's the importance to actually inform the process. So as we move forward and peel off the development, we know what improvements may have to be made.
Okay, no shortage of work for consultants, I guess. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. Appreciate that. And Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks. I guess my first question that popped to mind is hearing the roadway around this site. And I mean, anyone that's traveled in that area on a Saturday, I've seen vehicles parked on the side of the road, but I wouldn't have thought that was considered on-street parking. To me, it's vehicles pulled off on the shoulder on the side of the road, and it does pose a significant safety challenge for cyclists because there's doors opening along there. And so I guess I would just like to hear from staff on whether we consider that, or maybe we don't really have a classification for that. But I mean, is a roadway where vehicles are allowed to pull over and not be towed away? Is that considered parking? And I would like to understand how we are going to implement a biking infrastructure along there. You know, given that constraint that there is an expectation that, you know, the public's used to being able to pull over there when the farmer's market parking lot's full.
Thank you for the question through the mayor to Councillor McCollum. This is an extremely challenging transportation and traffic situation through there. Anybody who attends the farmer's market, we're actually talking about the redevelopment of the entirety of the property. Like any sort of developer, we wouldn't actually accept that transportation or that response to parking because we have active transportation goals through that corridor. So although it's challenging, this is why we want to have this conversation up front. This is a piece of property that is in the ALR, has been designated in the ALR. The range of uses there have some externalities. It is, I don't doubt it is a little bit challenging. We have work that's coming now, and we have a provincial authority that's going to say if this is okay or not. You know, we wouldn't have a trigger to have this conversation until and in such time as we make land use and zoning changes. But we're in a change situation. We think it's the right time to do that, and we'll certainly, just like anybody else, we would work closely to try and understand that. But we have key strategic priorities on active transportation, and we have to manage what and sometimes can be very challenging in that corridor. Actually, our organizations have shared goals in that regard, so I think we're trying to work together in that. But I think staff who are working on this file may have some other thoughts.
Ms. White.
Thank you very much for that question, and through the mayor to Councillor McCollum. Yes, the city manager has highlighted a few concerns that came up in our internal referrals to public works and engineering, et cetera, with the plans that have been doing with the cycling network, parking demand uses. There was a number of issues identified, which is what they'd like to sit down and talk with the CVRD and work through these issues so they can be resolved, because this is a master plan. And as the city manager has indicated, we would do this normally with any development application as well.
Thanks for that. That's helpful. And then I guess my other question is just understanding this, because we don't see a lot of these ALR referrals. I think this is only the second one I've seen in the time that I've been on council. And because we are looking at the complete plan for the site that's meant to be developed over a long period of time, what type of change to what we're looking at that's in front of us right now would trigger this coming back? Like, how wide is this process? Are we taking care of potential changes as well? Or I just want to understand a little bit more. Like, I guess what makes me ask the question is that there has been debate over the years about, you know, a multi-use bigger facility on that site, and there's division as to whether or not that's an appropriate use. And would a change like that bring this back to this table as well? Or is what we're addressing here tonight would accommodate either of those scenarios?
Thank you very much for that question, and through Mayor Wells over to Councillor McCollum. Very good questions. So the first step is to actually work with the CVRD on the master plan and have the layout of that, and finalizing a lot of these issues that we're talking about. As it goes through their phasing, there'll be certain things that are triggered that would come back to this table. So for example, one of the recommendations is about an OCP amendment to the LR land so that it aligns institutionally with the rest of the lands, the zoning, so that there's consistency, which is easier for the CVRD to implement that master plan, as well as consolidation. So things to do with zoning amendment, OCP amendment, would definitely come forward to this table for consideration.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and a couple questions for the RD. Thanks for the presentation. Just a quick thought. You were talking about the trail network, and it's a little off subject, but the old Dove Creek Bridge that was taken down years ago when Pierce C was built, was there any contemplation of turning that into a sort of a pedestrian bridge and creating that as a walking network? And you know, maybe it isn't, but there's an idea for you. I know a lot of people like to go out there and walk around in those. That's a very quiet road now.
Yes, there was plenty of contemplation around that conversation, and that active transportation network, unfortunately, it wasn't supported at the time.
Fair enough. The other question I had was around the road improvements that we're talking about, and if there's been any contemplation of cost sharing on those improvements, if I'm missing something in the report. You know, often when there's development, there might be some amenities that are brought in, and it sounds like we are contemplating, like everyone's talking about, a lot more traffic, a lot more use out there, which I think is great. But wondering if the RD feels like it's supportive of the idea of cost sharing with the city of Courtenay on that corridor.
We would have driveway permits in place for the current areas that we already use. And the last road improvements we heard from the city of Courtenay was consideration of a roundabout at Vanier. So that's another reason that we're hesitant to enter into a traffic analysis at this time, because we understand there's a lot of other pieces at play, and we haven't made our move here to finalize that closure for the Curling entrance. So I can't speak to the roads too much. I can't speak to, like, if there's no parking signs on the roads or any of that, it's out of our jurisdiction. We're just looking at our site and there are current traffic impacts.
Fair enough. Maybe it's something I have to lobby the directors that go to the other table. Thanks for the info.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. Councillor Hillian.
Mayor, I was going to move the recommendation if that's appropriate.
All right, there
I'll move that council direct staff to forward to the Agricultural Land Commission with a recommendation of support the application for a non-farm use and associated fill placement application for the Comox Valley Exhibition Grounds properties located at 4795, 4825, 4835, 4839, and 4875 Headquarters Road and Lot 3, Section 45, Comox District Plan 13392, except part on Plan EPP 81392. The council requests that the ALC consider the following items be addressed: A, traffic impact assessment; B, capacity modeling for infrastructure; C, coordination of parks plans, cycling network plan, and infrastructure plans into the proposed master plan. D, city land use and zoning items be addressed for 4875 Headquarters Road and consolidation of the parcels into one to address impacts of multiple property lines.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Did you want to speak to the motion any further?
No, not particularly. My only concern was whether or not our staff supported the recommended change. They don't. And if it comes to a contest between our staff and the regional district staff, I think it's fairly obvious which way we're going to go at this table. My apologies to my regional district colleagues.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. Councillor McCollum.
Evan's got his hand up and he hasn't spoke yet, so.
Oh,
I'll go
there we
now.
go.
We'll go
Yeah,
after
fair enough. Thanks for pointing that out. Maybe I'll just turn yours off for right now, and then we'll go back to Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks for the presentation. I guess my question is for our city staff around so in the appendix number 3, the comparative analysis. Which of those items are, so this goes to the ALC, they come back with a recommendation or direction, and one of the items staff spoke about was an OCP amendment. Is that for some specific items in this comparative analysis in the site plan? And if yes, which ones?
All right.
Right, through the chair to Councillor Jolicoeur. So yeah, the piece of the OCP land use designation amendment and the zoning change that would be needed is indeed only for that one parcel, the Stonehenge, the 4875 Headquarters. So that one, the A1, its uses are restricted to the agricultural use in a very traditional agricultural sense, agricultural businesses and things along that line. It does not allow what the A2 allows, which is the balance of the other properties, which is fairgrounds and recreation gatherings. So as soon as the uses become more of those gathering recreation facilities, assembly hall type of facilities. So at the moment, the way this is worded is to recognize that a lot of the proposal is about equestrian uses on that site, which are continuing to be farm use. And that as the proposal refines, and if it is to trigger or kind of tip into more kind of true assembly and gathering of the public, then our zone would not support that. And then technically, we'd actually need the land use designation to change to be institutional to truly formalize those uses. So as the CVRD staff did note that their concepts could change over time, as some things could shift. So it's a matter of if that happens. Now, it is also staff's recommendation that the whole site be zoned to the same, have the same zoning, so it can be dealt with from a land use perspective comprehensively, and also then there be that one property, not 5 properties. And so in essence, to do that, a rezoning would be required, and then the OCP designation would be required because a portion of it does not comply. So I realize there's a lot of kind of process I just described, but I hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think it helps in me in understanding all the requirements that will be put to the CVRD if this moves forward and in phased approach. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur and Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just had one other question about the traffic impact assessment. and how it relates to other uses in that area from the CVRD, because obviously there's quite a lot of discussion and contemplation around future plans at both the sports center and then further development of the soccer fields. But given that there is no change of use on those sites, if there was traffic impact assessments required in those changes, we would not have them referred to the city. Am I right in that? Or I'm just trying to understand what would trigger a traffic impact assessment in a different way than what's being recommended here, or if it would.
Thank you for that question, and through the Mayor Wells to Councillor McCollum. Yeah, so the traffic input is on here now to deal with the existing and the proposed non-farm uses to resolve some issues that have been identified, so we can have a clearer pattern moving forward. If there was changes in use and there was some permits that were generated, there could be a requirement for an updated traffic impact, or it may not trigger it at all. So that would be in the future when we deal with the phasing of the properties. But the idea is to understand it now so that it can inform the phases moving forward.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you again. Just to add to Ms. Wade's comments. Herein lies a little bit of the challenge, because the future uses that will happen in that area to be done, we don't typically require that. Some of our colleagues at the CVRD who deal with Ministry of Transportation, et cetera, we're not in kind of the same regime. So works on the Vanier school site might be a stretch to ask for those kind of things through the issuance of if any required building permits, et cetera. There's no subdivision happening. So herein lies a bit of a challenge. I would say, I said to the mayor, whatever direction council will give us, we will definitely work with the CVRD. The Agricultural Land Commission can be a challenging group of people to work to, not people, my apologies, an organization that has a mandate. Sometimes there's some real challenges. And so obviously, although we're adding conditions to recommended conditions for approval, which by the way, the ALC may or may not take, should they take that, then our staff are there to help through this. We're really trying to find our way through a very important site and to manage those items. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of inserting myself in the discussion, but just it's a bit of a weird situation to deal with.
All right, thanks, Councillor McCollum for the question, Mr. Garbutt. So I don't see any other questions or comments, and we do have a motion on the floor, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. All right, thanks very much for presenting to us today. It's much appreciated. We'll move on to the strategic cultural plan update. Okay. All right, I'll pass it over to Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Joy's going to give us an overview of the project. It's a very exciting project that we have, and we have Norda City, our consultants as well on this.
Through the city manager to mayor and council. Purpose of the staff report today is to provide council with a summary of the community engagement findings for the strategic cultural plan. The development of the strategic cultural plan was a strategic priority for 2023. It's identified as a priority also in the OCP, the 2019 Parks Rec Master Plan, and the 2019 Cultural Services Review. The purpose of the strategic cultural plan is to provide a framework for the city to support arts and culture for the next 10 years. Norda City affirmed that specializes in planning arts, culture, and heritage sector will be leading the work in partnership with staff. We're excited to bring forward this first report, sharing the findings from the community engagement phase. The community engagement process was carried out through an equity lens, following the cardinal directions of the OCP. The approach includes engaging with individuals with lived experience and community members who are historically underrepresented, including the Indigenous community members, people of color, newcomers and immigrants, the unhoused community members, people with disabilities, and 2S LGBTQIA+ community members. It's important to note that we couldn't approach the discussion about culture without recognizing and respecting the Comox First Nations connection to this land since time immemorial. We are in the the beginning of the process with our engagement with KFN. We met with them in the summer, and the KFN expressed their interest in being involved in this project. We recognize that our established timelines may need to be adjusted to allow for meaningful engagement and relationship building. Further details on our conversations and KFN priorities are detailed in the report. Now, the full What We Heard report is attached to the council report. I'd now like to introduce Louisa Plant, Project Manager of Florida City. She's joining us via Zoom. And she'll provide a short presentation on the key findings from the community engagement. Over to you, Louisa.
Thank you, Joy. Good afternoon, Mayor Bob Wells, members of council, staff and guests. I'm excited to share what we've heard from the community in terms of priorities for the new 10-year strategic cultural plan for Courtenay. As mentioned, my name is Louisa and I'm a manager at Nordicity, and I'm joining you this evening from Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, where I'm very grateful to live and work. And I'll be looking forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. So please, let's go to the next slide. First, I will recap the background and activities of the strategic cultural plan. So next slide. As mentioned just now by Joy, various strategic planning in Courtenay has highlighted the need for a cultural plan. And this has included the Parks and Recreation Plan and Cultural Services Review of 2019, the Official Community Plan of 2022, and strategic priorities for 2023. We know that arts and culture in Courtenay contribute to community wellbeing and economic development, and that they're about much more than just beautifying the city. Arts and culture can play a role in connecting people and addressing profound issues like climate change, mental health, and the toxic drug poisoning crisis. The plan aims to guide the city in its relationships with residents and neighbours, and to provide a framework for how the City of Courtenay allocates cultural grants and investment ongoing. On the next slide, I will briefly recap on the key objectives, which are listed here, but just to highlight some of them. It involves evaluating and benchmarking the impact of the cultural community, identifying cultural service needs and analysing cultural facilities options, identifying promising practices from other communities, and also developing a roadmap, timeline and plan for implementation. On to the next slide, we're currently in phase 3, which is analysis. So this is having been working on research and community engagement this spring and this summer. Next slide, please. We've sought to be as inclusive as possible in the community engagement process. So this has involved seeking input from equity priority groups who may not typically engage with planning. And this has meant taking a respectful and human approach, trying to prioritise trust and privacy, and also considering perspectives of diverse community members. One important component of this has been working with community organisations in Courtenay, who we're very thankful to, ones that advocate for equity priority groups to help ensure that as wide a range of possible community members have a voice. So on to the next slide. The engagements more specifically have involved a survey which attracted around 700 responses, which is great, 24 interviews with 54 people, an arts and culture sector focus group, a drop-in of public event, and 4 conversations with representatives of or people with lived experience of homelessness, being a newcomer, having a disability, and members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And these engagements were either led by us at Nordicity or facilitated by local organisations. As Joy mentioned, the city has also met with Comox First Nations Chief and Council to discuss working together on the plan development and implementation, and this dialogue is ongoing. One of the next steps will be looking to develop a collaborative cultural planning framework or protocol. So we look forward to that conversation and also discussing approaches to meaningful engagement while also recognising the challenges with the timeline. So we know that working together in a good way and defining a path forward takes time, as does real relations building. But now let me share with you what we've heard from the survey. So if we could go to this slide. Of the approximately 700 responses, the majority of the participants, which was 67%, attend or participate in arts and culture as a member of the public. And it's important to note that the survey isn't representative of the local population in that it's not kind of statistically modelled or valued, but it does indicate the views of the community who value arts and culture more than average. So of the participants, just over a third work in the arts and culture sector. The gender split was fairly even, but slightly skewed towards women. And the survey attracted a high number of responses from Indigenous community members and people of colour compared to average population statistics for Courtenay. The majority of participants live in Courtenay, and 20% live in the wider Comox Valley and 18% outside of that. On the next slide, we'll see how participants' ages compared to the overall population. So the Courtenay results are indicated in blue and census data is in pink. So in comparison, our survey attracted a high proportion of responses from young adults and a lower proportion of people aged over 65 and over. To take you through some highlights of the results on the next slide, the results show that a very high number of respondents, actually 94%, are culturally engaged, and nearly half of them said that they engage with arts and culture weekly or more. Performing arts, such as theatre, dance, music, are the most popular ways that people engage, and also respondents who work in the arts and culture sector were also most likely to work within performing arts. When asked how arts and culture in Courtenay impacts the community, nearly half of people said that it encourages social participation and a sense of belonging. On the next slide, we also found out that the average amount that people say they spend in the community before or after a cultural event is $105 per person. In terms of barriers to accessing culture, the main barriers are limited options nearby, limited options of interest, or just not knowing where to find out about what's on. However, nearly a quarter of participants said that they don't experience any barriers. Critical needs for the arts and culture sector, according to artists and cultural workers, are performance and exhibition space, which was highlighted by 45% of them, as well as rehearsal and creation space, as well as bylaws and policies that support arts and culture. On the next slide, when members of the public were asked what they'd like to see more of in Courtenay, the top response was more live performances, and the second most popular response was more special events and festivals. Artists and cultural sector responses were very similar, saying live performances as a key priority. So that was 44% of people said that, but it was followed by more arts education programming and workshops as the next priority. Overall, the main culture theme that the city should prioritise, according to both public participants and sector participants, is enhancing space for arts and culture. 35% of people overall highlighted this need, making it the main point of consensus. On the next slide, I will discuss the main challenges of arts and culture in Courtenay according to all the findings. So this includes focus groups, conversations, interviews, and survey. And the wonderful image here, I know it's quite difficult to read, but this is a live graphic recording by Jill Banting, which is from a focus group with 38 arts and culture sector participants that we hosted with the city. And these points are reflected in the following slides and also detailed in the What We Heard report. On the next slide, Courtenay's strengths include its natural beauty, which provides rich inspiration for arts and culture. And although the community is small, there's a substantial and vibrant art scene. There's also a strong collaborative spirit. There's established municipal supports for arts and culture, as we know, which includes the city support of the Sid Williams Theatre, Courtenay and District Museum, Comox Valley Art Gallery, and the Comox Valley Community Arts Council. Community support for and interest in arts and culture is notable, and this is evident by the number of arts organisations, artists, volunteers, and the number of participants. Courtenay has cultural offerings year-round, and this is also a regional pool, which creates positive social and economic impacts. Despite these strengths, there are also a number of challenges. So a key one is lack of awareness, recognition, and representation of distinct Indigenous cultures. For example, although Courtenay is located on the territory of Comox First Nation, there's currently limited visibility of KFN arts and culture overall. And there's a need to educate the community on Indigenous cultures, looking to increase understanding and to eradicate racism. Another gap in the community is the limited availability and affordability of cultural spaces, which was a key theme across pretty much every engagement. Municipal support, particularly in terms of funding, is considered inadequate by many. So there's a desire for more arts and culture specific grants and also staff specifically for arts and culture at the City of Courtenay. There are limited human resources in some areas of the cultural sector in Courtenay, for example, an acute lack of lighting and sound technicians, which is important for live performances. And also the capacity of arts organisations is limited by lack of paid staff in general, meaning that many organisations are relying heavily on volunteers. Another challenge is the physical accessibility of cultural spaces and venues within Courtenay. Another gap is limited arts and culture programming opportunities for youth, and then also an awareness of what is available for them. Drawing on these findings, I'll briefly highlight 8 key priorities identified by the community. So the first is engaging Comox First Nation, Métis, Inuit and urban Indigenous communities. Many participants across the board want to see more Indigenous arts and culture in public spaces. Indigenous survey participants, which was over 100 people in our survey, were most likely to say that Courtenay can further reconciliation and support Indigenous artists through more Indigenous naming, signage and visibility of culture, and also more opportunities for the wider community to learn about Indigenous cultures, languages and art. Participants also suggested that it would be helpful to have an Indigenous staff liaison member at the city. There's also a need to work collaboratively with KFN, which is a priority. The second need is more cultural spaces and facilities, which of course you have heard, with better availability and affordability. Specific types of spaces include, but aren't limited to, a black box theatre, multi-use spaces that can be adapted for different uses, and also outdoor venues equipped with stages for performances. In addition, existing facilities need upgrades to meet accessibility requirements and also to be properly equipped for live performances. And as this is such an important area, our project team is currently analysing the facility needs further and will identify potential options to meet the needs. There's a desire for more diverse and affordable cultural programming, both in terms of services delivered by the city and by local arts and cultural groups. New programming suggested by the community includes an artist in residence programme, more youth programming, more multicultural programming, and also more nightlife and live music events. Moving to the next slide, there's a need for more community collaborations and partnerships. For example, several participants highlighted the need to foster a better relationship between the arts and culture sector and the school district. There's also a need to have avenues for knowledge sharing across the sector, for example, regular networking events or gatherings to bring people together. There's a desire for increased municipal support, as mentioned, so this is both financial and in kind, and at the local and regional level. The cultural sector is keen to have more community grants and also more operational funding to support the hiring of full-time staff to build capacity. Other forms of support, aside from the city, include facilitating a community events calendar and building capacity, so for example, regarding grant writing. Various participants expressed the need to further develop cultural tourism, leveraging events such as gallery exhibitions and festivals to help make Courtenay the cultural hub of the region. On the next slide, the attraction and training of technical and cultural workers is important, especially in relation to technicians for the live performances and events. These needs could potentially be met through collaborations with educational bodies to develop professional courses or micro-credentials, or maybe through internships and mentorship to help youth learn in-demand skills. Lastly, there's a need to develop a public arts policy. So community members would like to see more murals and sculptures in the downtown core, and also for there to be more public art that uses the talents of local young artists. I'll now quickly highlight some specific needs from different communities within Courtenay, and although this will be brief, the full report does share some more detail. Some key needs highlighted by Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers include the need for more Indigenous cultural spaces, such as an urban cultural wellness centre, and also spaces for outdoor gathering. There's a need to ease and decolonise bureaucratic processes so that the city can fully respond to requests from Indigenous community members. On the next slide, regarding newcomers and immigrants, there's a desire for more information about what's on and also more representation of different cultures in the arts and culture programming, including in different languages. Regarding unhoused community members, arts and culture participation could be a really powerful form of healing, and participants highlighted the need for a gathering space such as a wellness centre, which could provide free arts and culture classes, but also key services like a place to do laundry. And there's a real need to listen more keenly to people with lived experience of homelessness and to work together to imagine new solutions. Participants with disabilities on the next slide also underscored needing to kind of listen to and work with people with lived experience and involving them in the solutions. So, for example, ensuring that cultural activities and events are truly accessible. And this means venues that follow universal design principles and that meet Accessibility Standards Canada guidelines, which currently often isn't the case, and also more information on how accessible different events are going to be for them before they kind of set out the door to attend. Members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community told us that there's currently a lack of visibility of their community in Courtenay today. And part of the reason is that there's no central place for people to gather. Also, people can be deterred from attending the 2S LGBTQ event because they fear attracting attention to themselves and can feel unsafe. And if these barriers can be overcome, there's a real opportunity to launch more LGBTQ+ activities and art shows in Courtenay and a lot of untapped talent. So I will now close by briefly outlining next steps. And these include, on the next slide, ongoing dialogue and conversations with KFN, further analysis, which is involving a comparative review of how other communities support arts and culture, economic impact analysis, so drawing more on the survey findings than other research that we have, analysing cultural facilities options as well, as I mentioned. And we'll then draft the recommendations for the strategic cultural plan and seek community input and feedback. And this will be via a live event and online this fall. After that, we'll develop the full plan, including an implementation strategy or roadmap. So on the next slide, to show you the components, the plan will include a vision and strategic goals, and these will be informed directly by the community identified needs. And the goals will be supported by objectives and a range of actions for the city to take. And the implementation parts will be linking those actions to key performance indicators so that they can be tracked, the progress can be tracked over time. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your presentation today. That was great, very digestible, which is always nice when we're talking about complex topics that have many different facets to it. I mean, the one thing that jumped out when you talked about, I believe it was on slide 23, your slide 23, the 2S LGBTQIA+. You know, we did just have our very first Pride Parade and Pride in the Park event just recently that was extremely well attended and extremely very positive event. So glad to see that, you know, something that was identified, that there even is some stuff happening already, but likely still more to be done. So with that, I do have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with Councillor Jolicoeur online.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Louisa, for being here to present your findings, and to staff. This was probably one of the most exciting staff reports and consulting reports that I've gotten to read since being on council. I really appreciated in the report of what we heard, Louisa, that you really highlighted the process of how you did this community engagement. I've kind of been sharing since joining council my passion for expanding our understanding of how we engage with community members, and to see a really thought out, deliberate way to raise people's voices to the front and collaborate with sector partners who have the relationships with individuals. I'm very impressed with the level of engagement that you've received. Over 700 survey respondents and 54 people participated in your interviews. One of the findings in the demographic slide that you had, I thought that was interesting. And I know that in the next steps, there's going to be a kind of a check-in with the community to make sure that the draft recommendations aligns with what they'd like to see. That there is a large discrepancy, I think 14% between those over 65 years of age, between the census data and who have participated. So I guess I'm curious to hear whether it be the 65+ crowd, or if there are any other specific groups or components of different groups that you're going to be doing explicit outreach to ensure that those voices are brought in. I know that a lot of folks who are patrons of the arts kind of fall into that category. And patrons of the arts, I know, are really important to move the needle in terms of some of the recommendations that you're bringing forward. I think specifically around cultural facilities. I guess my second question, I noted that it was quite clear that the top two were related to facilities, and you spoke to the next time you come to council, or the next phase of this work will be an analysis of what that would look like. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit to kind of give us a tease of what that might look like.
Sure, thank you. And so through Mayor Wells to Councillor Jolicoeur, thank you so much for your feedback, and really lovely to hear that. In terms of the representation, yes, that's going to be important for, well, particularly for the community check-in. We'll be looking at who we haven't heard from, like who we have already heard from, and we're really keen for as many people as possible to engage with that. So specifically looking at gaps. So you, for example, you've highlighted people over 65 and above. We'll be making sure that they attend. And I think also looking to go back to the organisations that we've engaged with, and also maybe thinking of others to ensure that we get as many people along as possible. And whilst, you know, engagement with KFN isn't limited to that, we also want to ensure that their members are invited and encouraged to participate as well. So that with that, it's still kind of early stages of planning for what exactly that event will be looking like. That we'll be looking to share the kind of main findings of what we've heard, some of the needs, and then trying to get people to work with us to kind of prioritise them so that we can dive into it a bit deeper before we get to the point of identifying the goals. So yes, that's a really important point. In terms of the facilities analysis and options, what we're working through at the moment is we've heard of such a range of needs, as you can see, and space was the kind of hot topic that everybody wanted to tell us about. And so it's really looking at trying to kind of whittle that down to what are the kind of core types of facilities that could answer those needs. So starting to kind of group things, thinking about the different sizes. You know, we've heard of such a range of things from quite small spaces that are needed to potentially large performing spaces, outdoor spaces. So we're looking also at what already exists and looking where the gaps are in terms of some mapping that we've done in terms of facilities. But alongside that, looking at the things that we've heard and some of the particular pain points that we're aware of, because there's things in relation to venues, but some of it is occasionally, it can be issues around sound systems, which are the problem. So that kind of indicates more of a infrastructural type upgrade that could happen there. Whereas some of it, you know, perhaps these are needs which can only be addressed by building anew, which we recognise is complicated, it's expensive, it's not to be undertaken lightly. So it's more due diligence on that. And that will be initially kind of identifying, you know, what that kind of range of spaces are, and then starting to think about like how feasible that could be. So obviously this would be very high level at this stage. It's not feasibility studies, but just kind of indicating with a bit more kind of clarity how the community could, you know, potentially start to answer that. And this will be also part of the final, the draft strategic cultural plan that we'll share with you as well. So we'll be looking for various feedback on that from you as well.
I just have a follow-up, Mayor. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Just on that last piece, I'm wondering if in part of your work on the facilities, if there's going to be a financial modeling component, and I'm wondering if there can be a comparative analysis of what other communities are doing between, is it funded typically by the city, regional district, a combination of private, public? I'd be really curious to know if that's in your scope and if that could be part of the next phase.
Yeah, at a high level, it will be thinking about what the kind of cost implications are from what we're aware of in terms of, you know, for new builds, like cost per square foot, also what we're aware of from comparative reviews for this project, but then also for different projects that we've been working on with different municipalities. So getting an idea of what those capital costs could be. So this would be, you know, less than probably a Class D estimate, it's very broad kind of estimate, but we are very aware of kind of costs and also thinking about where potential funding could come from too. So there is going to be an aspect of that as well. So as I mentioned, like, is much less than a kind of feasibility study because it's a number of different options, but it will have some depth to it in terms of different routes and also what's kind of financially a likely investment level.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that answer and for the question, Councillor Jolicoeur. Much appreciated. Next, we have Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks so much for the report and the presentation. I agree with Councillor Jolicoeur that it's great to see this coming back, and also just hearing how much of what our council priorities are and what direction we've been I think striving for, and hearing that reflected back when we've done this community engagement piece, that I think it's really reassuring to see how aligned our objectives are with what we heard from the public. And then I just had a few questions, comments about some of the details that you provided. One of the things I just wanted to appreciate is in the next steps that we'll be receiving some benchmarking. I think that's a useful exercise when we're trying to make decisions. I mean, obviously it jumps out that, the feedback that we're receiving is that there's a need for better funding in a variety of ways in the community. And I think really getting a good grasp on what we are currently supporting as a municipality, because we've made some strides over the last number of years, and then we have funding that goes to some of our cultural facilities. Some of it comes from our general taxation, some comes from gaming. It kind of is presented in various ways, and I think it would be good for us to have a really clear understanding of what we are doing currently, what other communities are doing, where we stand in that. And I'll speak for myself, but my impression of this council is that we're fairly comfortable being leaders in this space. It's not necessarily that we're looking to hit the average, but I think it's useful for decision making to understand, what our neighboring municipal partners are doing. I mean, I don't imagine we can really get into like the finer details, but just to have a clear sense, I think that's going to be very helpful for us. Really looking forward to better understanding how we can support Indigenous arts. And I imagine our deeper engagement with our Indigenous partners is going to provide some of that. And again, I think we've made some strides, but even hearing from the community, clearly there's so much more that can be done. So hearing how that support can be delivered from the city, I look forward to understanding that better. And then one other comment I wanted to, or question, is just around whether or not other communities have found a means of supporting accessibility improvements in independent arts and culture spaces. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward when we're looking at, these facilities that we're already in partnership with, like the museum or the art gallery. But we do have other performance spaces in the community that we're not as tightly affiliated with. And I would be curious to know if there are some mechanisms that we could look at, whether it be like grants for specific types of improvements, or if that's in the scope of work. I think that would be helpful as well, because part of what we're hearing back is that we need a more diverse facilities landscape for supporting the arts. So those were the things that came to mind for me in the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you for the comments and questions. So through the Mayor to Councillor McCollum, we're currently working on a comparative review, so looking at some neighbouring municipalities and municipalities of similar population sizes and demographics to Courtenay, to think about, so key questions are like, how do they fund arts and culture? What's their kind of governance approach? How many staff do they have, like full-time staff within the municipality for arts and culture? So that research is kind of, we're getting there with it. We're also waiting to verify some of that information with other municipalities. And one of the challenges with it is always trying to think about what's really comparable, because when it comes to arts and culture, it's something which can be defined in quite different ways. So what we've been working on is trying to really kind of pull apart the different line items to check that what we're looking at is comparable, because that gives us a much clearer picture. So again, this will be part of the later reporting to council. And as part of that, we can also start to think about, looking at ways that other municipalities or communities have approached the kind of facilities upgrade sides, kind of recognizing that if it's not a city-owned facility, then there's not necessarily a way to kind of encourage or kind of ensure that that's implemented with kind of accessibility upgrades. But it's obviously such an important need, particularly within Courtenay. So that's something that we can also be thinking about when we're concluding that research.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks so much for this, Louisa. This has been really interesting reading, and like my Councillor Jolicoeur McCollum, I was thinking a bit about the benchmarking and comparative review piece, and I appreciate all the information you've given. So I'll perhaps move on to a couple of other questions. I was really encouraged to see that in the sort of the demographics that I think it was 17% of the respondents identified as Indigenous, which is well above the average in Canada. And I know that some really fruitful discussions have begun with KFN. But I also know we're trying to sort of complete this report by the winter of 2024, sort of 6 months away. And I know that we place a real priority on making sure that we're having meaningful engagement with our Indigenous partners. Is there going to be sort of an iterative updating that goes on after that winter 2024 final plan? And that might be more of a question for our staffs than possibly than for you. But I was just wondering how to integrate the desire for long-term discussions and also complete the plan, how those two things fit together.
Sure, thank you. As through the Mayor to Councillor Cole Hamilton, this is something I think it would be great to have the city speak to as well, because that is one of the key challenges, and you've noted it, and it's a kind of, it is a key issue with the timeline is really how do you make that work between meaningful engagement and really ensuring that there's the kind of depth of engagement with elders in the KFN community and different members, and also what we're trying to do in terms of bringing together the analysis and so forth. So I think the iterative approach is one which is going to be most helpful, because there's still time, you know, at this point we are reporting back on what we've heard so far. We really want to get KFN feedback and input into that, and also from the broader community, but then also being aware that this is going to take a long time, because there's also the kind of implementation side. So with one of our main findings being that we need more engagement, you know, that kind of naturally leads into some aspects of kind of planning can't really be formalized, they can't be determined until that's taken place. So those are kind of some thoughts from me. I know that it's a very much kind of open-ended question and not too specific, but maybe I could turn that question over to the city.
All right, I'll pass it over to Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to Council, thank you, Louisa, for your response. As Louisa said, this is meant to be a bit of an iterative process. In some form, we'll have to conclude this piece of the project, but in our conversation with Comox First Nation Chief and Council, our discussion was about how this becomes a living document and we keep it that way, and how we collectively and collaboratively build a cultural planning framework with Comox First Nation. So that's a piece of work that will be ongoing, and we'll have to sort of keep the cultural strategic plan open and alive in such a way to be able to work collaboratively with Comox First Nation and adapt as we go along, as well as support the implementation with our Indigenous partners. So it's still something that we're in conversation with Comox First Nation about, and we'll continue to update and reiterate or iterate as we need to, and as we have those conversations.
Great, thanks so much. That's really just encouraging to hear that we're looking at it as you said, a living document. It's a wonderful way of expressing the fact that it's not going to remain static and continue to evolve. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. As you can see, Louisa, we're quite an enthusiastic bunch around this topic. So you'll probably hear from more of us as we go along. Not surprising, I was really thrilled around the range of engagement with kind of underrepresented folks, and making sure those voices were heard. And I guess I'm wondering about the comparators around if part of that work will be around looking at some of these more out of the box ways of looking at arts and culture in terms of arts for social change is what I'm thinking around, because I think we brought that up as a council of something that we saw as a real kind of opportunity or possibility. And I guess just a couple comments around that. I noticed during our Sims concert series, which is a free concert series in the park, very well attended. I actually had a couple folks from the recovery community say that they really appreciated those free concerts and having a place, a place where you could go and just enjoy being outdoors and dancing and enjoying the music. And I think that there are some real opportunities to support people in their journeys around some of the things they're struggling with, which of course we're grappling with in this community as many others are. So I'd love to see how maybe other communities are engaging the arts in that way to help out with that. And we do obviously have film festivals here and theater and all kinds of visual arts that address social issues. So I'd love to see more of that. And so I guess I'm wondering, just to say that obviously inclusivity and sense of belonging and connection are all the things that help people who are struggling with these things, not pushing people out or isolating. It's really about connection. So I'm not that I think that the arts and culture can solve all the problems, but I do think there is an opportunity to utilize more the strengths of our communities in that way to help with some of the issues we're grappling with. So would you say that would be part of the comparators as well, as looking at that maybe that approach in other communities in this way?
Yeah, thank you. And through the Mayor to Councillor Morin, yes, thanks so much for your comments and also that question. So I know with the case study for Campbell River, that's something that we've been kind of touching on already, but I think for the other communities too, where there's opportunities to do that and kind of highlight things which are happening, we will. I think that for some of it, we'll probably need to look a little bit further afield. So thinking it may be from a kind of municipal level perspective, or it could be something maybe happening within a community arts group from a similar size community. So we'd need to probably have the net a little bit wider. But that's something that we can do because also as we're starting to think about like the impact analysis side of what we're doing, the social impact is a really key part. So I know that obviously everybody I'm sure in your room is familiar with Walk With Me, but we're thinking about the work that they're doing already within Courtenay. That's really is pushing things forward within Canada, not just locally. So there's that, but it's also looking for those different kind of pockets of change where there's that direct correlation between culture and essentially kind of healing. Because when we think about these critical needs, often the temptation is to just think about the physical needs, but we're not just physical people, it's the whole kind of aspect of being human. So in that way, arts and culture can totally speak to critical issues. So we can certainly dive into that a bit more.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of literature and research out there that backs that up. And I just wanted to make mention of the nightlife comment because I would love to see more vibrancy, particularly in the downtown in the evenings, more events. Venues that are open. I kind of joked the other night I was out in Cumberland for an art show, and it was great, and left the art show and came into Courtenay to find a place to go to eat, and it was like the choices were quite limited. And I'd love to see more of those arts events happening and performance and all that kind of stuff into the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Morin and Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thanks. And this is my last comment and question is in the staff report, I really appreciate it. And I think it was the first time I've seen it under the policy analysis between pages 4 and 5, the reference to Council's resolution from 2020 on the adoption of the UNDRIP and the analysis that would have on this work. And I just have to say, I was really happy to see that. And I'd be curious to know how we can think about that declaration of support for UNDRIP framework for reconciliation and some of the other work that we do outside of culture and community services and rec. And I guess my question to staff and to the consultant more broadly, I also really appreciated that you named distinction-based approach that the province has adopted. And I know the city of Courtenay has, we've committed to reconciliation in many different ways. And I really think from what I'm reading in these reports that there's been a lot of thought, a lot of effort in how we engage both with KFN, but also with the other distinction-based groups. We have a quite active Métis charter community in the Comox Valley, and of course, quite a large urban Indigenous population as well. And I guess I'm curious, probably from a staff question for staff is, as we continue down this road, next steps, engaging with KFN and other distinction-based Indigenous groups, is there any thought that we've had around leveraging the work that Louisa is leading her team with the work from culture and community services to take whatever framework, whatever engagement process that we're establishing to potentially be used in other avenues and other activities that we have planned to work with, whether it be with KFN or with our Indigenous community members?
Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, as you mentioned, the distinction-based approach, that's something that we are newly applying. It's something that's new for us in arts and culture and recreation in terms of how we're approaching our engagement. So it's, I would say, very sort of early days for us, and Louisa and Nordicity are supporting us with their experience. And then of course we're learning as we go along. I think there's absolutely at this senior leadership table, we discuss our engagement approaches and strategies and share that learning. And so I know all of my colleagues are working towards this as well. And it's something that we continue to share. As for commitments moving forward, I couldn't make commitments, but council has directed us to adopt UNDRIPT. And so, that's for all of us to apply as a policy lens. And yes, we all have these conversations at the leadership table, but I would say it's new and we are finding our way forward through it as we undertake each of these engagement processes.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. I don't see any further questions at this point. I'll maybe make one comment, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. But one of the points on your thing was actually talking about the technical capacity of actually folks who can do this stuff. And as somebody who used to teach lighting and sound at UVic, it's certainly something that hits close to home with me, and I've had some conversations with NIC. They've got a film program up there where they're teaching all sorts of tech stuff, and there's really a lot of crossover there, and so really excited to see if there's something that in addition that can be done to make sure that we're targeting those issues. And of course, the upgrading of stuff, I've been really excited, probably more than most, to see LED lights and other things going up at Sid Williams. But I would say, one of our other very large facilities, our largest one, the sound system, when I moved here 20 years ago, was, I believe, 20 years old at the time. Unfortunately, old enough that it'll probably never die. But it has sort of served its useful life. And so hopefully stuff like that, if there's ways that we can look to upgrade and modernize, that would be fantastic. So, but yeah, from a technical perspective, I was really pleased, but also really on the cultural side and hitting all the points for really making this as an inclusive study as possible, so we can have the best recommendations. That may have generated another comment or question, so I'll pass it back to Councillor Jolicoeur.
I'm just happy to move the recommendation, Mayor, that the strategic cultural plan, what we heard report, be received for information.
Perfect. It was moved and seconded already, but I'll take that as a call for a vote.
Okay.
So all those in favor? And that's unanimous. Again, Louisa, thank you so much, and Joy as well. Did you have some closing comments, Joy, or are we all good? All right, we're all good. We'll move on to financial services, downtown Courtenay business improvement area bylaw update. And I'll pass it over to Mr. Garbett.
Thank you, through the mayor to council. The report in front of you is a response to the delegation and request regarding the future of the downtown Courtney BIA, both requisition and future boundary. I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a combination report. Our financial sector as well as legislative services help with this, and it was a partnership with the DCBIA. I think Mr. Langemeyer is going to speak to this report briefly, and both the newly installed, I think, chair or president of the DCBIA is here, as well as their outgoing executive director, Tracy, as well. So I don't know, we'll turn it over to staff, and then people are available for questions.
All right, Mr. Langemeyer.
Wonderful. Nice to be here once again, Mayor and Council. Today we get to see the ball rolling on updating the BIA bylaw. It is a couple years old, being adopted back in 2002 in a different time, but that's all right. $60,000 went further back then. So getting right into it, we're requesting the increase to the Downtown Business Association is requesting the increase. It is not city driven. As part of the mechanics of doing this, they have made the request to increase the bylaw. We have to do the petition against methodology to ask if the group out there agrees with increasing it to $120,000 for 2024, and there's an increased schedule up to a maximum of $225,000 in 2033. One of the key things we must identify here is that it is not an occupier of the property that can petition against this bylaw. It is the owner of the property, and if there's multiple owners, we have to get at least 50% of those owners to have an acceptable petition against form sent to us. More than 50%, 51%. 51%. So, you know, there's a bit of nuances in bringing this forward in the way that it is that it's always hard to ask, hey, do you want this? And then if you say nothing, you're in agreement with it. And that's sort of the goal. We want to hear back as least as possible. That's the goal of the DCBIA as this was put forward by them. One piece that I want to identify that the schedule of the actual levy, it is said in the bylaw is the maximum. Every year when the DCBIA asks the city to apply this tax, they could ask less than the maximum. So say in 2028, the maximum levy that we can do is 175,000. If they only need 120,000 to do their work for that year, that's all they would ask for. There's no requirement for us to hit the maximum. And beyond that, I'm open for questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Very excited to see this coming forward. I know it's been a long time coming for the BIA that has really done wonders with the amount of funding that they've had for a significant amount of time. And with that, I'll pass it over to Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. Of course, I'm generally in support of this. I've watched the BIA spend their $60,000 extremely wisely over the years, and I'm excited to see what they would do with some more money. And I understand it's fairly widely supported amongst the businesses down there. I'd actually just like to move the recommendation at this point, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that council direct staff to proceed with an update to the Downtown Courtney Business Improvement Area bylaw to increase the maximum levy as requested by the DCBIA. And that council consider first, second, and third readings of the Downtown Courtney Business Improvement Area bylaw number 3105/2023 at the September 27th, 2023 council meeting. And that council direct staff to undertake property owner approval for the proposed bylaw using the council initiative subject to petition against method under section 213 of the community charter.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. You've spoken to that, and I'll pass it over to Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I'm happy to support the recommendation. I see this process as something that the city supports, our council supports our downtown partners, and that we don't interfere if we're not needed. So yeah, I'm happy to support what they've asked for, and I just have a few questions about how the process works. The staff report outlines that there's 106 properties. I assume that's 106 currently paying into the requisition. And I just wasn't clear, and maybe it was in one of the reports and I just didn't catch it, but how many properties would it include in this expansion area? And then when we're initiating this process, that 50%, does that include the 106 already in? Or is it only applying to the potential additional properties that would be included in the bylaw?
Mr. Legemeyer.
So the bylaw before us today does not expand the BIA. It takes the existing BIA and simply increases the levy. I believe the long-term plan for the DCBIA is to look at expanding, but we are not at that stage.
Okay, that makes sense, because I was like, why is there no two counts in this? But right, because there was two pieces to this. Yeah, okay, that makes much more sense. So this is basically what was already engaged on, and generally the membership was in support, which is why, yeah, that I'm connecting the dots now. Thanks for that. And then, so I guess my follow-up is when that second piece takes place, and should there be a successful process in expanding this business improvement district, would that then increase? Would the maximum levy need to increase as well, or would the result be just a decrease per property? Like, how do those two things fit together?
Mr. Legemeyer.
So the maximum levy would be brought forward by that new area if they want to expand it or increase the levy and keep kind of the amount each property pays the same. They could do that, or they could share that same burden of the new levy across a larger group. It is really up to the DCBIA and what they want to do with an expansion plan.
So if the expansion plan comes back to council and the process is initiated, this bylaw would need to be revisited as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Frisch.
Thanks again. And I would be surprised if too many people were against moving ahead with the process, but I also just wanted to highlight how the Downtown Courtenay Business Improvement Association has really been a key partner with the city of Courtenay as we look to strengthen our downtown and keep it and make it the hub of Courtenay and the valley as a whole. I really do feel that this movement to get them more money for the DCBIA will allow them to actually flourish in this manner. And I know it's really difficult to do the business that their association does on a shoestring budget, as most of their members obviously have businesses and are working long hours to begin with. So finding those funds to support their organization and hire the help they need, I think will be extremely good for all of Courtenay. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Of course, we had a comprehensive presentation from the Downtown Business Improvement Association back at the beginning of the summer. But at that time, it was my understanding that expansion was also going to be part of the process. And I'm not 100% clear from the report that's been presented why that's not taking place now. Do we have any clarity around that?
Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you. Through the chair, or sorry, through the mayor to Councillor Hillian. We've spoken with DCBIA. Maybe they would like to speak to it. It's our understanding that I believe the strategy is to increase the requisition in the initial stage, show the ongoing and continued benefits of the BIA, which would then support a dialogue for a wider benefiting area. But not to put you on the spot, DCBIA, but I believe that is that a accurate representation of the strategy?
Great, that makes perfect sense. Thanks very much.
Right. Oh, and Councillor Gilles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I guess My question is actually in line with Councillor Hillian as well, based off of, I think a few of us were at the AGM and then the presentation in June from DCBIA, that this is a little bit of a change. And I know I talked to staff about this, and I tried to get a hold of, or I was hoping to get a hold of the DCBIA to ask some questions around, I guess, the communication that would have gone out to the current DCBIA members from the AGM and from the last report to council as a result of the shift in strategy. And I guess my question comes from, because in our staff report, our finance staff has kind of laid out the financial costing of an increase to the existing 100 plus parcels in the DCBIA. And when I saw that number, I was a little surprised in terms of the percentage increase from the original strategy, which was to expand and potentially decrease the levy per parcel as a result of having more parcels. And so I'm just wondering, and to Councillor Frisch's point, our downtown businesses are key partners in our community for our economy and for our art and culture and gathering places and community cohesion and connection and belonging. And so I do just want to know if the DCBIA has any comments or thoughts around what they think might come of this process going out to each of the parcel property owners, and if they've received any feedback on the new strategy that's been laid out.
Well, and being one of the folks that has been rep for the BIA, and I'm going to look for nods in case I'm off track here, but the feedback from the members from the study that was done, I believe through Urban Systems or was that there was overwhelming support for the increase in the levy from the current members. And there was also support for the expansion, but those two things are not necessarily going to be together. And so, and it might be because I was just at more meetings that articulation, I was aware of it personally, but it may not have come across, or there may have been more than one presentation, and maybe it wasn't sort of emphasized when the change happened. But to your point of how it's being, how the current members feel about the increase in levy, and I don't have the graphs and pie charts and stuff, but it was a significant number. I can't remember the numbers, but it was, I think in that order of like 80% or maybe that were happy to see the levy increase, which I might add, I believe has not increased since the beginning of the BIA back in the mid 90s, I think. Yeah, so I'm getting nods that I'm fairly close. So that current $60,000 has been decades of extremely well stewarded money that has paid back. And so with that limited amount, the current members did see great value in increasing that levy. And then once that dust settles, then move on to expansion. I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay. Yeah. So, and as the rep for BIA, I can shoulder some of the blame for maybe not articulating it back to council that there had been, like, there was many things being talked about, even just different sizes of expansion. And so that still, I think, has to be articulated out, which is, its own thing, which I think is why it was severed from the actual increase in levy. So, all right. I feel like I'm chatting a little bit too much. We do have a motion on the floor. My big comment that I'm really excited to see, especially as their levy did not increase for since inception, is the fact that every year there is a built-in increase, so that they don't end up through just the fact of no increases, that they're actually getting less ability to do things every day. It's almost like a reduction if you don't have those increases built in. So really glad to see that. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Excellent. Great conversation. And next we have the Courtenay Fire Protection district agreement. Councillor Moore.
Mayor, could I just go ahead and move that council direct staff to enter into an agreement with the Courtenay Fire Protection District to provide rural fire protection for a term of up to 5 years?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Do you want to wait unless there's questions, Mr. Garvin?
Staff are here to, it's a fairly comprehensive report. It gives an overview of the transition that we're working and the work that staff will engage with the Courtenay Fire Protection District Board and come forward with the resolution. Staff, both Mr. Langemeyer and Chief McDonald are here for questions if you like.
I'm looking around. I don't see any. I think we have great trust in our staff. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Fantastic. Next, we have internal reports and correspondence and the Strengthening Communities Grant Extension. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Mr. Garvin.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have an update. I'm really happy to hear this update, and Ms. Saunders will give an overview. Just want to say how proud I am of the staff work that we're doing in this regard and the positive benefit in the community. But Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to Council, the purpose of the briefing note is to inform Council that the City of Courtenay has received approval for a 1-year extension of the Strengthening Communities Grant, along with the associated funds to continue to provide the approved services through to June 30th, 2024. So the city will receive an additional $898,603 through the fund for approved services. This will bring the total Strengthening Communities Grant funding received since April 2022 to $1,961,763. With confirmed approval of the extension and additional funds, staff will now work with the Grant Advisory Committee and service delivery partners to reinitiate previously approved grant funded services. So as the briefing note describes, the previous grant term ended at the end of June, as did the funding. And so all services had to wrap up and had completed the spending of their funding and have just basically been on pause while we waited for a decision about the additional funding from UBCM. So we'll need to work to reinitiate those services. I just also want to reiterate that the extension and additional funding can only be applied to previously approved grant activities. No new activities can be added. So that includes the Daytime Community Access Hub located at Connect, rural outreach on Denman and Hornby, peer-based outreach and cleanup, community engagement, and anti-stigma outreach and training and capacity building activities across the region. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks very much. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Obviously, great news. Really excited to see that. On the last point, training and capacity building across municipalities, I know it's mentioned in there, focusing on trauma informed, and I'm going to guess maybe decision making or policy making or something else. It's the sentence isn't finished, but I guess my real question is, is there any money in there for something for council to be doing on any of those fronts, any training opportunities? And maybe that's just an idea I'm putting forward more than you having to answer that question fully right now.
Through the Mayor to Council, the training opportunities are quite broad. So trauma-informed practice is one opportunity for training, as well as de-escalation, cultural safety, working with different populations. And so we will look back at the training that was offered last year and assess what we need to continue to offer. We had over almost 500 people trained last year through the training offerings. And of course, we can make those available to council. We need to have a discussion just around how we roll out the training this year as compared to last year, and what was where we were successful and where we would make improvements. But it's quite a broad menu that we can select from in terms of the training that's needed.
Thanks. I look forward to hearing about it.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Hinton.
Thanks, Mayor. And I have to confess that there's part of me that would like to see us make the acceptance of this funding conditional on the commitment from BC Housing to move the Connect Center. But hopefully the work that's going on behind the scenes is actually going to bring that to fruition. I did want to ask if staff have any sense of why the decision to continue the funding has been delayed, and where things have effectively come to a bit of a standstill over the months of the summer. I'm mindful that there's a challenge when organizations have to lay off staff to rehire them again, and you in fact get the people back, and not to mention the challenge of the individuals receiving the services who don't get them during that period of time. So do we have any explanation of why it took as long as it did to for this to be approved?
Thank you for the question through Mayor to Council. We received, we put our request in, I believe, in May for an extension and the additional funds. We received approval on an extension, but not the additional funds fairly quickly. But of course, the additional funds are critical to the extension. And so just due to the processes within UBCM and the province, it took that long for the decision to make it through to the appropriate committees and then for us to be informed. So unfortunately, a little bit of a delay, but in a number of the services that are provided, for instance, some of the services that connect, it wasn't an elimination of services, it was scaling back. And so now it'll be a scaling up. So for many of the services, it's about scaling back up versus having to end completely and then having to restart again.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian and Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. When I was covering for the mayor over the summer, I did attend a DCBIA meeting where we talked about the strengthening communities, particularly around the training. And there were some business folks who expressed that they felt it wasn't that accessible to them and their employees. Because I did make the point that many of these trainings that are offered are actually look really good on a resume, as well as providing, some great knowledge and skills. So I thought it would be actually something kind of attractive to folks who are working in the downtown, and for them obviously to increase their staff capacity in these areas. So I guess I'm wondering if there would be any consideration to looking at different formats for the training that could accommodate groups like the downtown that maybe could be almost allocated to them at a particular time or something like that. Maybe there's other groups other than the downtown folks, but is that a possibility? I'm not sure when all the trainings were taking place, but I know that came up, and there did seem to be some interest, but it was expressed that it's not always accessible for them and their employees to attend. So.
Thank you for the question through the mayor to council. All of the training was made available free and was all published on our website and could be registered through the Lewis Center. So we tried to make it as publicly accessible as possible and no limitations as to who could attend. So members of the public, business owners, service providers, anyone was eligible or able to attend. We can absolutely have a conversation. I was looking for the DCBIA with the DCBIA in terms of targeted training. I'd have to look back at the grant and also just looking at the funds that are available. But we can also, one of the things that we have done through the grant is provide, we have paid for organizations to become members of the Homelessness Services Association of BC, which then provides free training to their members. And that is both in person and virtual, and trainings that range, in and out from an hour in length online to 8 hours in person, kind of depending. And so one of the things we've done is actually paid for those annual memberships for organizations, which then gives them access to training at their their own sort of availability. I know there was some discussion with some business owners about youth receiving training. And so that's something that we can also pursue. We'll have to just have a conversation about whether or not we do dedicated training or we just make sure that our partners are aware of what's available.
Yeah, that's great. I think it was more around the times, but I think there was also just around communication. So if we can increase that, that would be great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Morin and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. And neglected to add to my earlier comments, my deep appreciation to staff for all the work that's been involved in this project from the very early days, and I'm sure it will continue. I know there's lots of complications involved, and I think we're very fortunate that we have the staff that we have that are doing this work. So thank you.
I'm really happy to see this coming forward. And I mean, to one of the points that Councillor Hillian was talking about when we first received these strengthening community grants, and in our communications with the province, part of it is how do you make these sustainable so they're not these for lack of a better term, a peekaboo grant, which may or may not come. And as we found out, might take time if any changes come, or maybe you can't make changes and you're stuck to these criteria. And so to that point, we do have a meeting with the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions next week at UBCM. And I just wondered if there's any comments that staff might have that we might be able to one, thank them for what we're getting, but also to see what's next. And not that you need to answer now, because I know we're going to be talking lots between now and then, but just figured while we're having this conversation, if there's anything that comes to mind now or within the next few days.
Through the mayor to council, definitely something that staff can take away and reflect on. I would say, and I think we captured it in a previous Strengthening Communities Grant update, that the funding did lead to, I think in a combination with other factors, the province coming forward with funding for the temporary winter shelter, which is currently located at Connect. That previously was not funded by BC Housing. It was funded almost solely by the Strengthening Communities Grant. And so I think there is opportunity to be able to get access to other funding once these programs are in place, but there are other services that once the funding ends, there's not necessarily an alternative for, but something we can reflect on in preparation for UBCM.
Really appreciate it. And again, we're going to be talking to all sorts of ministers next week. So the more prepared we are, especially with some really smart staff input that helps us articulate the argument as best as possible. Really appreciate it. Councillor Jolicoeur, you haven't commented on this, so I'm going to assume all is good. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. All right, next we have a notice motion from Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This is just the notice of motion, so we'll have a chance to speak more about it, but just to read it out. Whereas the flying of flags is a way of showing acknowledgement and respect in many cultures, and whereas the City of Courtenay is committed to building a strong and respectful relationship with Comox First Nation, therefore be it resolved that staff engage with Comox First Nation and report back to council on options for displaying the Comox First Nation flag at Courtenay City Hall.
Excellent. Thanks very much for bringing that forward, and thanks to staff for moving the flags and giving us 4 flagpoles. That increases our flexibility immensely. So really appreciate that. All right, moving along for adoption, we have the temporary borrowing bylaw. Councillor Frisch.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that council adopt temporary borrowing bylaw 3104/2023.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments to this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and we'll get to council reports, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to mention one of the meetings I was at this morning. It's the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Committee of the Whole. It was supposed to be in Yellowknife, and due to the extreme fire conditions in the north, with climate change. That was canceled and we're doing it virtually, but still focusing very much on something called the Municipal Growth Framework, which is looking for a new deal for municipalities financially. I think we're all in this room familiar that municipalities get roughly 9 cents out of every dollar of taxes. And it's becoming a more and more unsustainable as we deal with poison drug crises and housing crises, and of course, climate crises and many other growing needs. So it'll be a focus of FCM throughout this year, and particularly when we're in Ottawa to lobby MPs the importance of finding a new framework that works for our communities, particularly as we grow. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. There is a report in the agenda, but I'll just highlight that the Eureka Support Society had their open house, I believe it was last week. And for those who don't know, the Eureka Support Society is a resource for adults with persistent mental health issues. And they have a variety of programs there, including educational, vocational, social, and recreation.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. My regular report will come at the end of the month, but I did want to highlight that as the council liaison to the Kuskooksim project with Comox First Nation and Project Watershed, there is an issue that we're dealing with just now. Council may remember that one of the concerns about this project in the early days was whether or not there was any contamination on the site. And there was, in fact, a certificate of compliance that had been issued by the province to the private landowner before the property was purchased. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens, the regulations have changed. And so we now have soils that do have some contamination, and this is creating significant extra costs in the handling and potential transport of those soils off the site. So we did have a meeting with the Ministry of the Environment, with the minister a week ago Monday. Mr. Garbett was there with me, along with representatives of the Comox Nation and the project. And we received a really good response with a ministry staff person to work with the project team, and the possibility of some exemptions and maybe the possibility of additional funding to deal with this issue. So it's made for a bit of a delay with the hope for completion of the project in the next year. But with any luck, the engagement with the ministry will help us to move forward. And significantly, this is an issue that will come up for other restoration projects around the province. And one of the points that we made to the minister was that the experience that we're having is going to be felt by others with similar types of projects, and they were actually quick to recognize that. So I thought it would be useful for council to have that information, because it is out there in public in the community, and it may be a concern for some of our citizens. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian, and thanks for your work on that file. Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. At our last meeting, we made the announcement for the International Day of Awareness that happened on Thursday, 31st. I know the mayor was there, and Councillor Morin, and likely many other elected leaders in the community as well. And it was a lot of fun, as well as a lot of grief and reflection. There was actually 2 Juno-nominated individuals with lived experience who were there, sharing their hip hop verses about the lived experience of people who are impacted by substance use. And so I think that was really, for me, a really great joy to be able to be amongst community members who have been impacted, to celebrate those lives that have been lost by the toxic drug crisis. And in addition to that, last week was our another Comox Valley Substance Use Collaborative meeting, and staff were there as well. We have representation from a few of our departments, and that project, that group is moving forward nicely with the establishment of different working groups to address each of the pillars. And I know that the committee, the previous committee, and the facilitator will be coming to council to report on phase 2, and looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Jolicoeur and Councillor McCollum. Okay, Councillor Warren. Excellent. I'm just going to mention a couple of things that have happened. Something that kind of came out of the blue within the last few weeks. We had a Comox Valley Search and Rescue fundraiser that was held at Innis Farms, and I just got the update yesterday that even though they only had 2 weeks to plan the event, that at this point looks like there's over $30,000 was raised. So that's an amazing and inspiring testament to our community. We also had the CV Comox Valley Hero Awards, and just to point out that Hereditary Chief Letty Speck won the Hero of the Year award, the highest honor. So it was a great event. We had the Mayor's Golf Tournament, which is always great, raising funds for all sorts of great organizations. And lastly, I did meet with Kevin Falcon, who is a MLA, and basically reiterated the same things that have been brought up in terms of a new deal, as it were, and the similar things I've said in the past about sharing revenues around liquor taxes, property transfer tax, fuel tax, et cetera. With that though, that's it. We have adjournment. Wow, it